Hello, hello, my fellow ass cheeks. I'm your host, the Great Aspie, and I'm here today to talk about one of my favorite games of all time, Dark Souls. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Okay, this is like a dumb voice. All right, I'm here to talk about Dark Souls 2. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I've recently been on a Dark Souls 2 video watching binge, right? I've been watching all the critiques about the game, and honestly, they're kind of bad, right? And it's not because the production quality is particularly bad or even the things that they are saying are particularly bad. The real problem is that they don't know how to play the game. And I'm probably going to title this video like Dark Souls 2 isn't Ganky, you're just bad or something like that. You know, really stir up the pot because we all know the key to any great discourse is to be as inflammatory as possible, as bad faith as possible. Obviously. Now, that being said, I really do want to talk about this because a lot of times the people who are playing this game, they don't seem to understand that Dark Souls 2 is actually pretty faithful to the Souls series in general. And I'm probably going to make this video on my game development channel in a longer form talking about the changes between Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, and then, of course, how Dark Souls 3 really isn't a Dark Souls sequel. It's more like a Bloodborne sequel, which that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are just big trade-offs that Dark Souls 3 had to do that I really feel hampered the Souls experience for me personally. But to get back to Dark Souls 2 and what Dark Souls 2 really likes to focus on, and really what makes the game very interesting, is level design. And I know a lot of videos like to say level design when they're talking about map layout or level layout, like how the levels actually connect to each other. That's not level design. Level design is actually understanding how the level changes players' behaviors. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, a very simple example is the rafters in Anne Orlando. When you get to it, I'm assuming that majority of you guys are not willing to dodge at this point because, you know, if you dodge, you're going to fall off the edge and you're going to die. That's level design. It's specifically saying, hey, this is how the level is. You can dodge if you want. It's just very risky, right? And Dark Souls 2 does this a lot. And in fact, that's one of Dark Souls 2's biggest strength is that it has a lot of levels that ask the player, hey, pay attention. You can utilize this. You can make your life easier. And one of the examples that everyone likes to bring up when it comes to Dark Souls 2 being incredibly bad is Iron Keep and Shrine of Amana. And you know what? I decided to have a playthrough. I wanted to see how bad it could actually get. Because when I played through these levels, I did it with ranged weapons. So I was like, okay, you know what? Let me play through this normally, because every time I played these levels, I never had the experience that a lot of these critics have, which is a little weird, right? So I wanted to go through and be like, okay, let's actually play through this with zero way of actually doing range combat, except for throwables, because throwables are available to everyone. So I got to Iron Keep, and how bad was it? It wasn't bad at all. In fact, it was pretty enjoyable. There wasn't that big of an issue, and in fact, during this run, I also specifically decided not to level up ADP, and you can look in the footage yourself. I'm not having any issues with this. The majority of my deaths when it came to this part of the Iron Keep, the initial part, were to the Smelter Demon, because my dodge timings weren't perfect, and I ended up getting caught in some combos. I don't know if they were true combos, or if like the game maybe just wasn't reading my dodge input. But I also died a lot because I decided to use the Zweihander in the middle of this, and the R2 for the Zweihander can be targeted, which led to a lot of situations where I ended up hitting the wall next to the enemy, and then the enemy killed me. So, and also, another thing I should mention, all of this footage is with me with a level 0 weapon, except for the Cestus. The Cestus is the only weapon that I use in this footage that would be level 6 at this time. But all the weapons I'm using, the Black Steel Katana, the Zweihander, both of those weapons are level 0. So again, this is very doable. It's possible. You just have to pay attention. You can even see in the footage that there are moments where I pause and show to the camera that you can see the ambushes coming up towards you. The game is telling you to slow down. Stop running into these fights. Stop going after the archers. Okay, if there's any rule in Dark Souls 2 you should probably, just listen to is don't go after the archers. Kill the enemies before you go towards the archers, because what ends up happening is the archers have a shit ton of guards near them, just like real life. As it turns out, it's a good idea to put guards near your archers. So you can see a lot of these particular ganks that people like to point out, they're not actually ganks at all. They're ambushes. The players who get stuck in this are running way too fast through the game or trying to be aggressive with the game. And every single mechanic in Dark Souls 2 is pointing to you being less aggressive. You can just give an example, right? Dark Souls 1, if you get stuck in a corner, you know what you can do. You can save and quit out. Enemy positions get reset completely. You don't have to worry about it. And if you decide to run towards the fog gate to, get to the boss quicker, right? You get iframes on it. So realistically speaking, what decision are you making when you decide to run towards the boss room? There's not that big of a decision, because every single choice that you could make is in the benefit of you running towards the boss room. You get more Estus for the boss itself. You don't have to deal with the enemies. If you get caught, you can save and quit out. And if you get to the fog gate, guess what? You get iframes. Dark Souls 2 is telling you, hey, no, if you want to take the risk to go towards the boss gate, you have to take a risk. There is no, you can just save and quit out. Dark Souls 2 will actually save the positions of the enemies. And of course, Dark Souls 2 took out the iframes for the fog gate, except for when you actually start to walk through it. There is still iframes for that. So it's that initial portion where your hand is on the fog gate itself, where you don't have any iframes. Because again, the game is trying to tell you, no, you can't just run to the fog gate. You have to engage the game that we created. Do it. Now, the second portion of Iron Keep, I don't understand how many people have played through this portion and have never utilized the trap doors. This is like the most fun mechanic in this entire area. Why are you not using it? These traps are for you to use. The bullheads, they are for you to use to burn the ironclad knights alive. That's what they're there for. The trapdoors are so you can drop people into lava. The guillotine, right? That is for you to use against the Turtle Knight. And of course, in that corridor, if you decide to run through without paying attention, there's actually a lone knight behind you that waits, because there's one that drops in front of you and there's one that drops behind you. But that drops later, because again, the game is making these ambushes particularly to catch out people who are not paying attention to their environment. The game is saying, look at the level design. Utilize the level design. It is way more fun if you use it that way. A lot of these quote-unquote ganks are far easier when you utilize the level design to either cut down the enemies through traps or use it so you can funnel enemies through and you can push people off. It's far easier and far better and a far more fun experience if you do it like that. Now, the second issue, Shrine of Amana. This is the one that everyone bitches and moans about. Jesus Christ, I have not heard the end of this. And you know what? When I went through this, I did it with the bow and arrow as well. So, I can't really complain. So I decided, hey, let's try to do this with just melee only, right? In fact, I even did the torch for this run, because if you guys didn't know, the Shrine of Mana, if you bring a torch with you, you can actually see the edges of the level. So there are a lot of times where it's very hard to see where the edge of the level is, and you might fall to your death, right? If you have a torch, not a big problem. And in fact, the game encourages you to use torches, because there are multiple areas or multiple places in that area where you can light the torch. So I decided, let's play this portion how the game developers intended. And how many times did I die? Once. I died once. And this is, okay, to be fair, I had a level 5 Santian Spear, one of the best weapons in the game. Well, quote-unquote best weapon in the game. It's just a very unique weapon. I like it. Plus, it's infinite durability, so it's very useful. But in this area, you should at least have a +7 or above weapon at this point. They've given you a lot of Titanite chunks, okay? So it's not particularly like an excuse to say, oh, well, you had a fully upgraded weapon. Yes, you should have a fully upgraded weapon at this point. So why was it so easy for me? Well, you can see in the footage, you can just dodge the magic arrows. You don't need to run. You do need to run. You don't need to dodge, right? You can just sidestep these magic missiles. It's very easy, very doable. In fact, you can use the terrain to block this stuff, and you can basically go through it. Nope, easy peasy lemon squeezy. You just got to make sure that you're killing off all the wizards that are targeting you from the other side. There is a pathway in this level for you to utilize. Don't be dumb and just say, oh, you know what? I'm just going to run through it. You're going to die. And it's very funny how a lot of these people who love Dark Souls and says, it's great if a game, kills you over and over again to make you learn that what you're doing is wrong, but yet doesn't seem to understand that Dark Souls 2 is killing them over and over again because they're not utilizing the level design in order to make their lives easier. And, there are so many other points and places where the design element of just utilizing level design is very obvious. You have a boss where you can have it fall off the edge. You have the pursuer where you can use the ballista to kill them. And even in the straightforward boss fights like the old Dragon Slayer and the Mirror Knight, you have these pillars that you can use to block attacks. In fact, with the old Dragon Slayer, you can use the pillars, but the pillars will break. So it's very clear that the game developers wanted you to utilize that, but only for a small amount of attacks. Again, a lot of the people who really love Dark Souls seem to miss all of the level design gimmicks that Dark Souls had. The Iron Golem, just like with the Dragon Slayer, you can have it fall off. It's purposeful. It's made that way. With Ornstein and Smough, you can use the pillars to separate the two bosses. It's designed that way. In fact, a lot of people seem to miss that the reason why Dark Souls 1 is as fun as it is because of level design. If you actually look at the mechanics of Dark Souls 1, it is very bare bones. It is very straightforward. The enemies are simple, the bosses are simple, but the reason why it's very interesting to play through is because the level design is very interesting. Look, if you played through Dark Souls 1, I assure you, you remember the Silver Knight Bridge because it was so fucking annoying, but it was interesting. Just like how you remember Sen's Fortress because it was annoying, but it was interesting. The game changed up not the enemies, but the level. It said, hey, you want to play against this, snake guy? You did it already 4 times before in a normal room. What happens if you add in a giant swinging pendulum blade? That's interesting. What happens if you try to do it on a tiny ledge? Why would you do that to me? But that's interesting. Ultimately, a lot of the fault of these critiques lie with the critic themselves because, again, they're not trying to engage with Dark Souls 2 in the way that Dark Souls 2 is asking them to do. What they're doing is they're saying, okay, I played Dark Souls 1 with a light roll build, and I'm going to try to do Dark Souls 2 just like that. It's like everyone thinks that the light weapon build of Dark Souls 1 is the definitive Dark Souls experience, without understanding that, no, the game was definitely designed around every single weapon class, every single role type. Primarily because if you didn't know, Dark Souls 1 and 2 have a particularly strong lean towards you sidestepping enemies. It's not really about the dodging, it's more about your positioning that's far more important. But yeah, that's my just general criticism of all the critiques about Dark Souls 2. There are some more specific things like the Feeble King. He said a lot of things about, Dark Souls 2 has very Skyrim-like combat because you have infinite healing items without acknowledging that it takes time to utilize those healing items. You're very vulnerable during that time, and it's a risk to use it. Unlike in Skyrim, where healing is immediate, there's no risk to healing other than the fact that you might run out of items, and that's it. It's not the same. It's not even remotely the same. I know why he's saying it, because he's trying to say that because there's this aspect of having infinite health in Dark Souls 2, you don't have to engage in the combat as much as, say, in Dark Souls 1, making it feel like Skyrim. However, again, this is a complete false equivalency. They are not the same. You can't just spam soul gems until you are okay. If you want to try it, you can. I'm going to let you know it's not going to be a good solution for you. You're going to die repeatedly. Unlike in Skyrim, where even with if you have all the health potions in the world, there is no challenge unless you get one-shotted. Because you can just get hit, drink potion, get hit, drink potion. And again, there is no delay. Which, just the delay by itself is a big enough difference where it's not the same thing. But yeah, that's it. I just want to talk about Dark Souls 2. I love Dark Souls 2. There's a lot of weird and fun things about Dark Souls 2. It's also the only Dark Souls game where New Game Plus actually changes things. And it's also the only Dark Souls game where you have weird fucking weapons. And then it's also the only game where you have a scavenger hunt when it comes to random moths all over the place, as well as hidden hollows. If you didn't know this, there are absolutely hidden hollows all over the place that you can only find by using the torch and noticing that the hollows have a shadow in the torch. It's really weird. I highly recommend that you guys watch Limit Break's Dark Souls 2 videos in regards to all the weird thing that Dark Souls 2 has done and the New Game Plus just by itself, because there's a lot of lore inside of the New Game Plus, and really, it's just interesting. I really wish Dark Souls 2 was more beloved because a lot of the ideas that it had were actually amazing. And it's really sad to see a lot of these good ideas go to waste because a lot of dumbass people don't seem to understand that the game was actually perfectly fine. Even Scholar of the First Sin, I think, is 100% okay. I don't understand why people think that it's really Ganky without realizing, hey, maybe the game is telling you to stop running in, and maybe they're not ganks at all. Maybe you're getting ambushed, because if you played through Dark Souls 1, there's a lot of times where you get thrown 3 enemies at a time. I guess that game was Ganky too, right? No. Obviously not. People don't have the same kind of ideas because, again, they have a hate boner for Dark Souls 2 because they died over and over again because they were dumb.